Hello everyone, welcome back to the Carlton Carnivore's house here. I am not inside one of the greenhouses right now because where this plant that I'm talking about today grows is a bit too tight of a space to get any cameras in there and have me in it. We're actually sitting just out front of the Highland greenhouse, which is behind the camera right now, and behind me is the chaos of the reptile area. But the plant that I have to share with you guys is returning back to a group that I haven't visited in a little while, a Mexican butterwort species that has quite a few different variations in cultivation and is relatively easy to grow as far as the Mexicans go. It's probably one of the better beginner species because it's quite tolerable or tolerant of a lot of different conditions and also isn't quite as likely to enter a hard succulent phase that you have to really pay attention to. And that is Pinguicula agnata. You can see these guys are in bloom right now. They're going through their kind of fall to winter bloom cycle. Now, the variety that I have here is Pinguicula agnata True Blue. It can get a little bigger than this. Once I repot it, it'll probably get much bigger, somewhat larger flowers, but this is a species that is endemic to the state of Hidalgo in roughly south central Mexico. And out there, these guys grow at semi-moderate elevations, 3,000 to 5,000 feet, give or take, and they grow on calcareous or limestone cliff faces. So oftentimes southern or eastern facing cliffs that receive quite a bit of moisture when the monsoonal rains come in during summer, but then dry out completely in winter when it gets cooler. And so these guys, like most other Mexican butterworts, are adapted to being able to survive those conditions by going through two different growth phases. If you keep them moist in cultivation, you may not see both growth phases because these guys will kind of stay in their carnivorous state as long as they're kept moist, and they'll just kind of shrink slightly in winter. But in the wild, these guys go from their big, flat, sticky carnivorous leaves to a much smaller, more succulent, fleshy winter rosette when everything dries out, and that allows them to conserve water and survive the winter season without actually going into a complete dormancy. Because as long as they've still got those leaves, they're not dormant. They're still photosynthesizing, they're still producing nutrients within the leaf, and that is also oftentimes when they actually produce many of their flowers is during that winter succulent season. So these guys, on average, get between about 4 and 6 inches in diameter, and they have more or less oblong leaves. So narrowest at the base, and they grow out fatter out towards the tip before going to a nice rounded, slightly narrower tip. In bright sunlight and in good soil, they will tend to be a little more flat to the ground and slightly wider leaves. The exact conditions will kind of affect how these guys are growing. Again, these are due for their repotting cycle, so their soil is not the best right now, so they've got slightly more upright and slightly more slender leaves than normal. So those will become a lot fatter as they go back into a better soil once I deal with these guys. So that is their summer rosette, all right, 4 to 6 inches across, the sticky glandular leaves. Now, the growth habit of these guys is actually very, very similar to another species that I've covered before, Pinguicula gigantea, except just a little smaller, and a key detail is that agnata does not have glands on both sides of the leaves. It only has its digestive glands on the upper surface of the leaf, not the lower. Gigantea is known for having those glands on the lower side as well. So that's one way you can tell the difference between the two species, because even with the flowers, those two are actually very, very similar in overall growth habit. Now in winter, that rosette will shrink down to sometimes no more than 1.5 to 2 inches across, and it's a very dense, succulent rosette. And at that time, they'll often lose many of their roots as well, which their roots, they're really not used for much else other than anchoring the plant. They will take up a little bit of moisture from the soil, and that's how the plant does keep itself nice and turgid. But for the most part, they're used just for kind of anchoring themselves in place. And so in winter, the roots will die off, but they're still stringy structures that are staying there, so they'll keep the plant anchored until the summer rains return and new roots will grow out and allow them to grow back into their carnivorous summer rosette. Now, Again, oftentimes during fall is when they start blooming. They'll sometimes bloom throughout winter as well. These guys produce one to several stalks that may be up to 4 or 5 inches tall, and each stalk will produce a single flower. That flower, usually, this one's a little mutant right now. This one has it a little more, but it's only just barely showing. They'll usually have this tiny little cylindrical nectar spur right at the back before that immediately blows up into a larger cylindrical corolla tube that is usually kind of a greenish yellow coloration. And that runs all the way up to the 5 almost equal size, equal spaced petals. Now, a lot of other butterworts, they'll have notably smaller, differently shaped upper lobes to the flower, and then larger, more flamboyant lower lobes with slightly different shapes. These guys are kind of what you would call isolobous, so they have single lobe shape. So they're all kind of the same shape. The lower lobes are slightly longer than the upper lobes, but not by much. So the plant, or the flower, looks almost the same all the way around. And if you were to turn it different directions, it would still look about the same no matter how you look at it, at least until you notice where the reproductive parts are inside the flower. Now again, this species is somewhat variable, and it's mostly variable in its flower coloration. The leaves of the plants they're usually bright green, but there are some forms that will get nice reddish blushes under strong lighting, but for the most part they're green and they look relatively the same across the whole species. The flowers, though, will vary a little bit. True Blue here is the one variety that I have currently, and it's got this lovely, mostly white flower, but it's edged by this rich indigo violet coloration, and also will have dots of that same indigo coloration right around the inner ring of the throat before it turns yellow. Other varieties of agnata might be entirely white, or almost a solid shade of that lavender purple indigo coloration, and variations in between. You can find a number of those different varieties for sale in cultivation. Personally, this one I really like because it's got that nice contrast between the white flower and those really dark edges and dots. It makes for a nice pop when you look at it. But it is a relatively simple species overall compared to how some other Mexican butterworts are structured in the flowers and leaves and stuff. But it is a great one to start as a beginner plant because, again, like most butterworts, these guys prefer a fairly mineral-based soil. They don't like a lot of organic matter in the soil, so you could actually grow them in a purely mineral soil as long as it's able to retain some moisture, but these guys will be tolerant of a bit more variation in that than most others. So their preference, of course, would be almost pure, like calcareous limestone rock soils. Pure perlite was actually a pretty good mimic of that kind of soil, so you could use that. But if you grow them in closer to a, say, 2-to-1 perlite to peat mix, they will tolerate that as well. That peat, as long as you don't have it sopping wet, these guys will still grow in that. So they're going to be fairly tolerant of you making mistakes at first when you're trying to grow them. Now, their conditions overall, besides the soil, is, again, just moist during summer. In winter, if you actually keep them just moist, they will shrink a little bit, but they'll retain those succulent, or those more carnivorous leaves, a little bit less succulent than the winter rosettes. But you can also let them dry out almost completely, and they'll also be fine with that, just spritzing a little bit of moisture every few days to keep them just barely off of completely dry. They like a fairly bright amount of light. The stronger the better. Full sun might be a little stronger than these guys actually prefer, so strong artificial lights are actually great for these guys. An eastern-facing windowsill or southern-facing with a slight overhang is actually great for these guys as well, because then they get a fair amount of sunlight, but it is filtered through the glass and maybe not hitting them all day long. They will also tolerate up to part shade, although you will often see them lose any color if you have a form that has that reddish leaf blush, and they will often tend to become a lot longer, lankier leaved and look a little bit less like the natural species should. So brighter light is generally better for these guys still. And the temperatures for these guys, They tend to like it slightly on the cooler side, even in summer, like most Mexican butterworts do. So during the daytime, they will tolerate temperatures sometimes up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, as long as it cools down into the 60s, low 70s at night. You can even drop it down almost to the 50s at night, and they'll probably be okay with that as well. In winter, they want it even cooler, so maybe in the 60s during the day and mid 50s at night. In the wild, these guys have been known to actually tolerate slight frosts. I don't recommend it in cultivation, but should you happen to have a power outage or something, it's something you don't have to worry about these guys. If it drops down into the 30s, they'll be fine for a night or two as well with that. So very, very tolerant plants. And then, of course, feeding is not necessarily a requirement for these species. They'll grow just fine as long as they've got a little bit of mineral that they can pick up from the soils. Again, that mineral soil, perlite, vermiculite, pumice, or granite, there's a little bit that they'll pick up from there. But you can also use small fruit flies. If you have stuff that's flying around, they will occasionally catch fungus in the gnats and such. They're not really a good control, unlike what a lot of people try and market these guys as for fungus gnats and fruit flies, because they're designed mostly to just kind of catch enough to sustain themselves and give enough energy to flower. But you can feed them with, if you have live fruit flies or stuff flying around, or you can get dried fruit flies, bloodworms and such, or a good low urea liquid fertilizer, very, very low dilution applied to the leaves. So you want just enough nutrients for them to kind of react. The leaves will dimple in and get a little bit wet when they contact food, and that's when they absorb the nutrients that they're trying to get. But you want to do that very, very sparingly, because if you overfeed these guys, you are giving more risk of rot, getting stuff into the soil that will trigger the roots to go bad, and you don't want to do that. When these guys flower, generally, it's not really possible to self-pollinate these guys. You do need to cross-pollinate them usually in order to actually get seeds. And in the wild, that's done by small flies or sweat bees and such that go into that corolla tube. The stigma is a flap hanging down from the top of the flower. And behind that is where the pollinia, the anthers, are at. So an insect going in there will brush past, deposit pollen onto that stigma, and then as they back out, they'll lift up that flap and get pollen on their back and go to the next flower. In cultivation, if you have two different clones, you can cross them. You're probably going to have to break open the flower to do so to get to those reproductive structures, because they're all the way in the back of the corolla tube here, underneath where it connects with the pedicel here. So you have to get all the way back in there with like a toothpick or something, pull out the pollen, transfer it to a different clone, and then vice versa in order to get seeds. But they're also very easy to just propagate, leave them on their own. They will eventually divide on their own and produce new plants. This one here is actually in the process of doing that. You got the main rosette here, but then it's budded, and this is a new rosette that is starting to grow out right here. So they'll divide themselves and form colonies over time. But you can also take these leaves and just pull them off, the whole leaf, and just lay it on dry soil somewhere. You don't want to have them moist for the first couple of days. They kind of want to form a little bit of a callus. So just leaving them on dry soil, or even on the counter, you could do that for a couple of days to let them harden up, and then just set it on very, very slightly damp mineral soil. And after a couple weeks, you'll see the bottom of that leaf bud full of little tiny plantlets, and you can propagate them very easily in that way. So it's a simple but still beautiful plant. Very easy to grow, great beginner species, and certainly one that I would recommend as potentially a first foray into the Mexican butterwort world. But that is about all that I have for that species, though. I will be trying to cover a few other species as I go through repotting things here. Some butterworts. We're going to be starting on the Highland greenhouse with marsh pitchers and the Highland Nepenthes and stuff like that. So you'll be seeing those probably in the next few months. But if you have any specific species that you might want to see that I haven't covered on the channel yet, you can give a suggestion here in the comments. If I have that plant and it's in a good enough condition, I may consider trying to get a film of that going. No guarantees, but I will try my best. And if you enjoy educational videos like this, certainly you can find more information about the plants and the animals that I work with at my website, carltoncarnivores.com. The blog and database are there for information access for everybody. It's free to get to those things. I'm also always posting photos and video tidbits and stuff, informational things on social media, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, etc., all at Carlton Carnivores. And it is expensive to edit these videos, the time it takes to go through them, to keep raising these plants and take the wildlife filming trips that I do. So if you'd like to help support perhaps in a more financial manner, again, watching the channel here is a big, huge help for me, because the more subscribers we get, the more likely it is that we will reach monetization and I will get paid just for making these videos for you. But if you'd like to help support in another manner, you can buy some of the plants that I have available on my website shop, or become a Patreon member, where you get early access to these videos, access to the monthly seed contests that I do, where you can get things that I will not be offering usually, or maybe offering at a higher price on my website. So you get access to that. Additional exclusive merch is also available there as well for members. You can also do one-time donations at Coffee. A simple donation there might be literally as much as 1 cup of coffee a month you can do, and that actually really does help. If a handful of people contribute that, that helps support things a lot. Or you can simply contact me for other means as well. But until next time, I'm Hawken Carlton, and this is Carlton Carnivores.